Hi, welcome to the AWE Experience. My name is Chef Eli Dunn. I'm the owner of Eli's Kitchen in Warren, Rhode Island, and a two-time Food Network Chop champion. Today is all about authenticity, and nothing is more authentic to me than clam chowder. My mother was the chef and owner of Phoebe's Fish and Chips in Seekonk, Massachusetts for over 30 years, and her award-winning clam chowder was simple and delicious, made from nothing more than fresh quahogs, potatoes, butter, bacon, and milk. When I opened Eli's back in 2014, I created this recipe as a tribute to her legacy. Now, no chef is anything without his or her sous chef. And my virtual sous chef for the day is Lisa Bergeron, the co-creator of AWE. So I'm just gonna give her a call. Hey Lisa.
Hey Jeff, how are you?
I'm doing well, how are you? It's good to see you again.
Thank you for joining us from Hope in Maine and on our day of authenticity at the AWE Awe Experience. So welcome, welcome.
Yeah, and I would love to say, I want to thank you again for being a part of the Reach experience. It was such a wonderful experience, a really enriching experience, and really helped for me lay the groundwork and the foundation for, my pandemic pivot. So thank you again for that.
Well, this is a fun way to what we're calling centered beginnings and getting our day started. And what better way than to cook up something, and hopefully people have the recipe handy or they can get it. But I just wanted to let everyone know a little bit about you. And I learned, like you said, a little bit about you and your business when you went through our Small Business Reach program. But let everyone know a little bit more about you.
Sure. So I was born in literally above my mother's restaurant back in 1977. Yes, I'll be 43 in a month. But I grew up in the business, and my mother owned a really successful seafood restaurant in Seekonk, Massachusetts for 30 years, like I mentioned. And I think in my childhood that seed was planted with a love and appreciation for hospitality, for sourcing locally, and so I think that really set the stage for me later on in life when I opened my restaurant, now just over 6 years ago, to really try to carry on the tradition and the legacy of my mother's restaurant. So.
Wonderful, wonderful. So tell us a little bit about what you're going to cook today. I know you mentioned some clam chowder, and tell me how that connects to your authenticity.
All right, so you're going to be a part of this, so pay attention. So today I'm going to be just preparing a Rhode Island style clear clam chowder. Now what makes this clam chowder special is instead of the traditional milk or cream that's the base of a chowder, what most people are used to, this chowder is made almost exclusively with fresh quahog juice and only a little bit of butter. So it's much more seafood forward, not as heavy, not as rich. So really simple ingredients, basically butter, flour, bacon, potatoes, onions, quahog juice, and fresh chopped clams. And pretty much everything you see here was sourced locally as much as possible. So, my sort of guiding principles as a chef is, source responsibly, cook with love, and share with others. And hopefully I'm gonna get to do a little bit of that today with you also.
I love that, your food philosophy. That's so connected to who you are, right? And tell people a little bit of how that you cook with intention and you go beyond the dish.
Yeah, so I think intention is kind of the sixth flavor, and I've had customers at the restaurant come up to me and say, I really tasted the intention you put into my meal today, and that's the ultimate compliment, because I put everything into cooking. I love cooking. I love being of service to people, and I think that's something that can be tasted in the finished product. There's a certain passion there, which I certainly have, and so, if I can go to a local farm, if I can go to a local vendor, someone, at a place like Hope in Maine and Warren, I can buy a local ingredient, and I can then put that into a dish that I've made a million times with history and heritage, and then share that with other people, with other folks. That sort of completes that circle of being of service to others, being of service to the local economy, of being of service to local farms, and of being of service to food.
Yeah, it's such a ripple effect. And tell everyone a little bit about, I want to give a shout out to Hope in Maine and their Nourish Their Neighbor program, but you've been a part of these causes and this purpose that food brings to people and helps our communities and people. So talk a little bit about that.
Sure, and while I talk about that, Lisa, I'm just gonna start prepping some of the ingredients here, just so I can get the recipe started. So basically, I, as a part of my food philosophy of being of service to others, I try to, as much as possible, involve myself in community-based fundraisers, food events, and Hope in Maine is sort of at the forefront in, at least here in the East Bay and in Rhode Island, at sort of helping people grow their businesses, helping people turn an idea, leverage an idea into an actual business opportunity. But they also are heavily involved in combating food insecurity and helping Rhode Islanders who may not be fortunate enough to afford a meal. And so, they have the program Nourish Your Neighbors, where essentially they have restaurants donate dishes, for people who are experiencing food insecurity. And it's really important, obviously, because there are a lot of people who are suffering right now because of the pandemic, but also before. So really, they do a lot of really amazing work here. And so, so it's an honor.
So tell me where you're at in the recipe. I know I am your sous chef, so just back us up to what you're doing so anyone who's following along can get in those first couple of steps.
Sure. So the base of a chowder, of any chowder, but of this particular chowder, is bacon, and bacon's going to give us, essentially going to give us a little bit of fat to start the recipe. So I have a pan here over about medium heat, and I'm going to add some bacon to the pan and what's called render the bacon. So I'm basically just going to cook the fat out of the bacon and get the bacon a little bit crispy. And once the bacon gets to a certain point, I'm going to add butter to the pan to just add richness to the dish. Obviously a little more flavor, and that's the base of what will eventually become the roux of the dish. And a roux, and it's a French term, which is basically just flour and a fat, in this case butter, and it helps thicken the dish and give it a little bit of texture. Now this dish could also be made gluten-free if that's your thing. Just omit the flour. It wouldn't have quite the same mouthfeel, but it would still be equally as delicious. The flour doesn't add too much flavor, it's more about texture. So yeah.
And I love that you've talked about how you want to make recipes that really help everyone. It's inclusive. So you go to your restaurant and there's something for everyone. So even though we omit flour, you are ready to give those substitutes, which is exciting because we've been talking about inclusivity and the importance of creating connections, and so you do that through your food and your recipes.
Yeah, so my, this idea of sharing with others, as well as sourcing responsibly, cooking with love, I believe cooking is an act of service, and so I try to divorce my ego from that process as much as possible. And for me, the chef is always right kind of mentality, it doesn't apply to the way and how I feel about food and how I cook. And so I really believe in the collaborative process. So like, how can I make this dish work for you? How can I meet you where you're at? How can I have on my restaurant menu? How can I have, instead of just a salad for the vegan, how can I have an actual substantial plant-based meal with locally sourced vegetables, because I want everyone to be able to experience delicious food. And so, whenever I'm making a recipe, if I can make it gluten-free, if I can make it plant-based, if I can make it lactose-free, I really try to create recipes that are adaptable. And I think that I'd hope that future generations of chefs take on that mentality, because I do think that something is lost when it's like, okay, I'm the chef, it's my way, this is how it is, I want you, and there's a place for that, of course, but for me, it's about cooking for you. What do you want? How can I make you happy? That's really what guides me, Lisa.
Oh, I love that. It's so welcoming, and it really just connects so much. As we talk about making recipes, people like to add their twist, their little flavor, and that's bringing their own authenticity into the recipe that they want to create. They start with your magic, and then they add a little sprinkle of their magic, and they create a wonderful dish. So to me, that really brings it back to that authentic cooking style. So where are you at now? Walk us through to where you are in the recipe process.
So my bacon is rendering. I've added the butter, and I'm just essentially I want to get the bacon to a point of crispiness, but I don't want it to go too far. I really just want to cook the fat out of the bacon, get it a little bit crispy. And I'm preparing my onions, which are like one of the sort of most basic staples in any chowder. Adds a nice sweetness to the dish. And you know, there are like obviously some pro tips. One of the ways to cut an onion is if you cut an onion through the top the long way in half, and then you turn that onion on its side, and with the tip of the knife, you cut strips through the onion, and then turn the onion 1/4 turn, and then cut across the other way, you get nice, even, square pieces of onion. And it's just kind of one of those little things that we do as chefs in restaurants where, you know, we just essentially get like a perfectly even cut.
Is there a particular kind of onion that you're using?
This is just a Vidalia onion, just a simple sweet onion. I've always used white onions or sweet onions over red onions. They're just a little meatier, a little bit sweeter, not as sharp, I would say, and just really traditional to chowder. All right, so my bacon and butter are really, the butter's starting to foam, kind of getting a little bit of that toasty brown butter aroma. Now I'm gonna add my onions to the dish. And I'm basically just gonna, you know, I have medium-high heat here. I'm just gonna cook these onions down until they're soft, starting to get a little bit translucent. And once the onions are a little bit soft, that's when I'm gonna add my flour, which is the base of the roux. And that's what's gonna thicken the soup later on when I add the clam juice and the potatoes, and at the very end, the chopped clams, which the chopped clams you add at the very end, because you really don't, I mean, they take just a minute, like just a few moments to cook. So I usually add the chopped clams right at the very end.
Can you overcook chopped clams?
Yes. I mean, you can overcook anything. I do think that it's really not going to take away from the experience too much, but growing up in a seafood restaurant, I'm quite picky about seafood. And so I think most seafood, scallops, shrimp, most things, even salmon, benefit from being slightly undercooked. And I do think, you know, that makes people a little bit nervous, but in my experience, it's completely safe to eat a slightly undercooked scallop or a slightly undercooked piece of salmon or something like that versus pork or chicken, obviously. So I'm just peeling my potatoes while I'm cooking the onions, the bacon, and the butter.
Good. Well, while you're chopping and cooking, tell us a little bit about where you're at right now. What's happening in the world of Chef Eli?
The $1 million question. So, you know, I think that I'm a silver linings person. I've always been that way. And in every situation, no matter how dire and extreme, there's always a silver lining. And for me, the silver lining in the age of coronavirus has been the extraordinary permissions that coronavirus has given us, that the pandemic, that quarantine has given us, as a permission to essentially reinvent ourselves, to essentially to pause, take a step back and say, you know, do I go back to where I was pre-pandemic? Or do I exercise some agility and some innovation, and do I evolve, you know, as an individual, and in my case, well, both as an individual and as a business owner. And so our evolution at Eli's Kitchen has really has been organic. I mean, I don't think any of us could have predicted what happened in 2020 and what continues to happen, but one of the first things that we had to do was kind of go into a sort of lean manufacturing type place where we had to trim everything down we are still currently only offering takeout. And so we had to kind of take a step back, you know, and we're really small. We don't have outdoor seating. We don't have a lot of space. And so we focused, instead of figuring out how we can safely feed people in person, we focused on how we can leverage takeout as a sustainable business model. And for us, it's a little bit of kind of a hibernation. You know, we're kind of just treading water, waiting for the world to get quote unquote normal again. But at the same time, knowing that all of these changes that we're making are sort of guiding us in this direction of the evolution of the business. And that it probably will never be the way it was before, and that's okay. I challenge people to say, you know, why go back to the way it was before? The way it was before may not have been the best way for you as a person, for your business. And so I do think it's really critical for us as business owners to be open. You know, I love the metaphor of this situation and life in general as being a river, right? And like, you know, you can step into the river and you can let the river carry you downstream, or you can fight against the current, or you can try to claw your way back onto the bank, you know? And I've really just stepped into this river and said, where is this gonna take me? I trust. I'm open and I trust that wherever I go and wherever my business goes, as long as I'm using my guiding principles, right? Source responsibly, cook with love, and share with others as my sort of core values, then I do think that I'm gonna come out of this, or we're all gonna come out of this better, in a better place. So.
I love that. I love that. And we've been talking about that all the last 2 days, and we'll be really diving into that later today, because we have permission, as you said, to pivot. And when we go back to what's our guiding principles, our values, it's just like, I bring it back to actually cooking a recipe. It's really hard to duplicate it sometimes, to make it exactly the same way, right? And maybe the next time I go to cook something, I try a little twist, or I get a little better, and my recipe gets better. I don't always try to duplicate it exactly. So I love this idea that we get to create our next plan, and that's exactly what you're doing. So I congratulate you on really sharing that philosophy. It brings you are beyond the dish. You're taking food beyond the preparation. So very, very cool.
Thank you, Lisa. So I just I chopped up my potatoes into small, maybe half-inch squares, and added it to my onions, bacon, butter, and I added a little bit of flour. And I'm just gonna kind of cook all of this in the flour for a little while. Whenever you're making a roux, a flour-based roux, you always want to cook it for a minute or so to cook that sort of raw flour taste out. But stir constantly, because what you don't want is the roux to burn to the bottom of the pan, which, you know, will change the flavor, and also it won't thicken as well. So I'm really just cooking the roux here for a little while with the veggies. And now I'm going to take fresh quahog juice, literally just, that's all it is, the juice that came out of quahogs. And I'm gonna add this right to my vegetables and bacon here. And essentially, I'm just gonna cook this. Once this comes up to a simmer, I'm gonna cook it until the potatoes are fork tender. And then I'm gonna add my chopped clams, season, and then plate the dish with some other things. So.
Getting us all hungry for lunch. And I want to let everyone should know that the recipe will be, if they don't have it, we'll be sending it to them, and we'll be posting it at our website. This is such a fun way to get our day started. We did this cooking demo, we did some things yesterday, these pre-sessions, just a way to avoid the Zoom fatigue and really create connection among people. I think even for teams, I've heard lots of fun Zoom activities for distant teams who are not together in person to share a favorite recipe and actually cook a meal together. It's a great way to bring people together when you break bread.
Yeah, and speaking to bringing people together and breaking bread, personally, my coronavirus pivot, as a result of the pandemic and the fact that the restaurant is really kind of lean right now, is that it's given me more bandwidth and more time to explore other revenue options, under the corporation of Eli's Kitchen, and I've been able to essentially open myself up and my schedule up to private parties, micro catering. Now, so many people had weddings planned, had things planned this year, and the entire industry was decimated. And so I started receiving calls early in the pandemic, hey, my caterer canceled, what, can you come and cook? Can you help? And I used to have to say no to those types of calls because I didn't have the time or the bandwidth. And I said, yes, the river of life is saying, go here, let me go there. And so I've been able to personally get back to doing what I love to do. As a business owner, I found myself staring at the computer more and worrying about numbers and paying bills and all that stuff. And there was a certain fatigue to that. And coronavirus essentially gave me the extraordinary permission to come and to pivot and to do something different. And I've come back to my roots, which I get to go and cook for people on site. You know, you can hire me, Chef Eli Dunn. I come to your house on site and I prepare a custom meal for you and your guests, under 25 or 15, depending on the governor's limit. And, you know, we, in a safe, fun, inclusive, engaging way, I collaborate with these people to sometimes I end up planning parties with people, and sometimes they just say, we got it, come to my house and cook. And so I
want you to come to my house.
Yes.
I hope everybody out there invites you to come in. And those people zooming in from different parts of the country. Again, you know, another pivot is really thinking about online, and I think that's the really exciting part about. You know, of course, it's caused people to hit the pause button, and we talked about this priority shift. It makes us rethink where we're at, and it's a permission. I think it was your word. It's my permission to pivot.
Yeah, extraordinary permission to pivot, and it's been wonderful. And so if anybody is listening, and this is my shameless plug, and if you're interested in booking me, you can do so through www.eliskitchenwarren.com and just click on the Book Chef Eli Dunn tab. And people reach out to me, and you know, we have a discovery call, and it's really wonderful because then that whole process kicks in, right? That source responsibly, cook with love, share with others. I get to collaborate with these people and curate a menu tailored to their dietary needs, their party, their whatever the situation. And so I'm able to both be a restaurant owner now and also kind of do what I love. You know, I love to cook, and I love
It's a yes and, which I love it. And I hope everyone that's watching you cook is thinking about their yes and that's right. Exciting. So tell us where you are in the recipe. So we want to know how we can make this delicious clam chowder. So
essentially, I'm you know, this mixture just came up to a simmer, and I'm just cooking. I'm stirring a little bit to prevent the roux from burning to the bottom. You know, you wouldn't want to do this over really high heat, so I have like a medium to medium high heat. And I'm just going to cook these potatoes till they're fork tender. You know, I actually had the opportunity to cook this dish on national TV for Martha Stewart, which is like a story for another time, really. But briefly, I was on Chopped, and somehow, you know, the gods were watching, and in the first mystery basket that I opened, there were quahogs. And it couldn't have been more unfair for the other contestants. I mean, I literally grew up in a house with a driveway made of quahog shells. So I was able to make my Rhode Island style clear chowder, but with quahogs, yu choy, which is like a sort of like a bok choy type vegetable, Chinese tea eggs, which are like a weird fermented kind of hard-boiled egg, and chicken schmaltz, which is rendered chicken fat. And so I made a chowder using all of those ingredients with these ingredients, basically. And I impressed Martha Stewart, you know, which was pretty cool. So there's a little history to this dish.
I love that you said that you kind of have that unfair advantage to have quahogs, because I don't even think middle of the country may not even know what a quahog is.
Yeah. Well, people are like quahog, you know, and it's just, you know, and watching some of the other contestants from Tennessee, from San Francisco, wherever, trying to open a quahog was like, oh, these poor people. You know, and I was just like just, you know, a minute I opened them all. So I was really, really lucky, you know, and I'm great.
I feel like even though you and I are in two different locations here, I feel like I can really smell that beautiful dish simmering. I really do, and it's making me super hungry.
So that's the goal.
So where are we at?
That's the goal. I mean, and then, you know, I love food so much, Lisa, that and I'm sure you can see when I talk about food, I get passionate, right? And I have such a powerful taste memory that if I go to New Orleans, or if I go to San Francisco, or I go to New York, or I go somewhere and I have a really amazing food experience, I come home and I'm like, how can I recapture that? And my taste memory is so powerful. Like, I don't have a palate where I can taste every ingredient down to, you know, the half teaspoon, but I have a sensual sensory taste memory, you know? And so when I talk about food, I'm talking about, it's sort of like encapsulating all of the amazing food experiences I've had, and I get really excited and I get really passionate about it. So
I can see that. And you know, it brings it back to where our day is launching today. It's all about authenticity. As leaders, we have to be authentic. You know, running our businesses, we have to be true to ourselves. As you said, the pandemic has helped us think about and maybe even shift our priorities a bit. So it's exciting. So tell us where we're at on our recipe.
So we're really close. We're you know, about a minute out here. I'm just waiting for these potatoes to get a little bit more tender. At this point, they're not quite fork tender. So, I really want to, the clams, literally when I add the clams, I'm adding them and I'm turning it off, and I'm just gonna let the residual heat of the chowder cook the clams. I don't wanna boil them, I don't want to. You can eat clams raw, as most of you know, you can have a raw little neck, maybe not a raw quahog, that might be a little weird, but so I really just wanna kind of get them in there at the very end, and it just adds that last bit of magic. And then, I always finish my chowder with chopped fresh dill, a little bit of
interesting. I wouldn't have thought about that. I would have thought of like a parsley or a different ingredient.
Yeah, so dill is one of those nostalgic scents and flavors for me. My mom had it growing in her garden. So I think it's just kind of my thing. I don't know, I'm sure there are other things that would work really well, fennel, parsley. But I just love how dill adds like a little pop of freshness and herbaceousness to what's essentially a pretty rich dish. And then I add a little bit of garlic butter, which again, like fortifies and adds some more flavor. And then a little sprinkling of paprika, which to be honest, I do because my mom did it. I don't think it adds a ton of flavor, and actually the judges on Chopped didn't like the paprika. I think I put too much on one side. So yeah, so I'm just really waiting for these potatoes to get fork tender, and they're pretty much there. And this is pretty much the last bit of the recipe. Yeah, these are good. These potatoes are good. So I'm just gonna add, Lisa, these chopped clams right to my pan. And if you were making this dish at home, from just quahogs, right? Like at the restaurant, we'll get chopped clams and we'll get quahog juice because we make giant batches, right? And it wouldn't make a lot of sense to open all the quahogs from scratch, but it's still fresh. It's just the work's done for us. But if you were doing this at home, you would literally open the quahogs first thing, separate the juice from the quahogs, chop up the quahogs, remove any bits of sand or shell that might be in there, and which is important because you don't want to get a crunchy, piece of shell in a bite of food. And then set that aside for the end of the dish. All right, so I've added the quahogs, and I'm just gonna give a taste here.
Well, that's not fair. Yeah. Can you send me a virtual taste?
Oh my God, it's so good. Okay, so I'm just gonna, I'm essentially just gonna plate this in a bowl, and this batch I made here, again, the recipe, you'll have access to the recipe online, and hopefully you download that recipe and you try to make this dish yourself at home. This is exactly that recipe, and I think here this would probably feed six bowls, maybe 8 cups, depending on how many people. So good sized dinner party. So I'm just gonna get some of this chowder. I don't quite have the right tool for this, but I'm just gonna get some of this in this bowl here.
Here in Rhode Island, chowder is one of our favorite recipes of the 4th of July.
Right, and a lot of times, I know it seems sometimes like a weird dish in the heat, but it actually works. Seafood plays in the hot weather really well, and I think this is a great dish to pair with some clam cakes, sitting outdoors on a patio. So I'm just gonna add to this bowl of chowder, maybe, like a teaspoon of garlic butter right in the middle. And this is some fresh dill that I got from Four Town Farm, one of my favorite places to shop. Check them out in Seekonk, Mass. And so I'm just gonna add some chopped fresh dill to the top of this chowder. And just a little sprinkle of paprika for color to finish the dish. And that is it. That is Rhode Island style clear clam chowder cooked with love. Thanks, Lisa.